Where the real fun begins. Let's start by creating a function. The first thing we need to do is do a define, which is def in Python. We'll just create a silly function name, a function, open close parentheses, and a colon. You'll notice that idle automatically indents for us. This function will just print something out. Okay, so now we have a function. How do we use it? Well, our call function, you just type its name, open and close parentheses, and hit enter. That calls our code that we just wrote up above, and inside that code it calls the print statement, which, as you can see, it printed out. That was really easy, huh? Well, now we're going to create just an empty function. This is also known as a stub. So we'll just create something called stub. Also open close parentheses, and we'll use pass. Now the pass is a keyword in Python, and it just basically says don't do anything when you hit this keyword. So if we call stub, nothing should happen. As you can see, nothing happened. Pretty simple, right? Now of course these functions are pretty boring. They don't really do a whole lot. Let's actually create a function that can do something. In this case, we'll create a function that can add two things together, like a and b. A and b are parameters for the function. Some might even call them arguments. There's a lot of talk in the Python universe and in programming in general about what to call these. Are they parameters? Are they arguments? Are they the same thing? Anyway, it really doesn't matter that much as long as you're consistent in what you call them. Alright, so in this case, we're going to take two arguments, a and b, and return the addition of the two. So return means that it's going to return something from the function. Previously, like with the stub, I probably should have showed this earlier, but if you were to print with the stub returned, you'd find out that it actually did do something after all. Well, that doesn't really show it. Let's see. I believe if you do x equals stub and you print x, you'll get something special. Yes, you'll get none. So by default, the functions in Python return none. So in our case of our add function, it'll actually return whatever we pass to add together. So let's just try that out. So we'll call this one, we want to call add with an a and b parameter. So let's pass it 1 and 2. And we call it, and you'll notice that it returned the number 3. Most of the time you want to assign the return value to a variable. So let's create a variable and do this one more time. Equals add. This time I'll give it a couple of different numbers, 3 and 4. And let's print the variable out. As you can see, it's 7. So Python is really smart. It took those two numbers and added them together and returned them, and they were assigned to that variable. Now, that addition operator can actually do more than just integers. So let's try something else just for the heck of it. Let's call add, say ABC, 1, 2, 3. Let's see what this returns. As you can see, you can also add strings together. Now we could do something silly and pass in an integer and ABC and find out what happens. Whoops, we have a type error. You cannot add an integer and a string together. That's good to know. Let's see what else we can do with functions. As you may have guessed, we can also pass in what are known as keyword arguments. So let's create a function that can do that. Create a keyword function. Same, we'll have a equals 1 and b equals something like 5. And we'll still do the same thing as we did before, a plus b. Alright, so in this case, you'll notice that the function accepts two values, a and b, but it also has a and b assigned to something within the function definition. What this means is that we now have defaults for a and b. So you can actually call the keyword function standalone, and it'll return something. It'll actually add 1 and 5 together and create the 6 because it already has default arguments. If you want to, you can also call it with just one or the other. So in this case, let's call A equals 5. If we just do that, let's find out what happens. As you can see, it took A as 5 this time, and it left B alone because we didn't pass a new B in. So it took 5 and 5 and added them together. Now, of course, you can also do this by position. So let's say we want to add 10 to our keyword function. In this case, we're not specifying if 10 is A or B. But because A is first, that's what it'll get assigned to. And we could actually prove this if we were to actually print out A and B in our function. You'll just have to take my word for it or try modifying the function yourself. Alright, so let's try doing a mixed function, one that has regular arguments and keyword arguments. Alright, so we'll call it mixed. A, B equals 2, and C equals 5. In this case, we want to return all 3 of these. I plus B plus C. Oops. Alright, let's try calling mixed all by itself and see what happens. Alright, so the mixed function is missing one positional argument, A. So mixed obviously needs something passed to it. So let's try passing it a number like 10. Alright, so 10 gets assigned to A, B is already 2, and C is already 5. 10 plus 2 plus 5 is 17. Of course, you can also call your mixed function other ways. So let's put this at a 3, and let's make C equal to something different, like 7 or 8. Alright, let's try this and see what we get. Okay, so we passed in 3 for A, B is still 2 because we didn't change it, so that makes 5, and C is now 8, so 8 and 5 is 13. Pretty cool, huh? There's another piece that we probably should look at, and this is called the args and qargs, or A and KW. Basically, you'll see this from time to time in your Python programming. Let's just take a look at it, because it's easier to explain by actually writing some code. Alright, so let's create a special function. Whoops. F-many. In this case, we'll use special code, KWA args. These are just conventional names. You don't actually have to call them this, but as I said, that's the convention to use. So in this case, we're going to print out what our arguments are and our keyword arguments are. And that star args means that it'll accept basically an infinite number of arguments, and the star KW args means it'll accept an infinite number of keyword arguments, basically. Infinite's kind of a relative term here. Anyway, let's try this out and see what it does. So let's say we just pass it some numbers, and we'll pass it like a name equals myself, and I don't know, we'll say job equals programmer. Let's just see what this does. Alright, as you can see, the arguments get printed out, 1, 2, 3, as a tuple, and the keyword arguments get printed out as a dictionary. This is really handy from time to time. You'll especially see it when you're creating like an API. Most of the time you probably won't need to do it this way, or you won't need to do it at all, because you'll know how many arguments and keyword arguments you need ahead of time. Now let's move on to scope. I've gone ahead and cleared out our session so that it's a little bit easier to follow. Scope will actually tell us when and where a variable is defined and where it can be used. So let's create a couple of functions. I'll just call this a function A. And we'll create a few items like A equals 1, B equals 2, and let us return A plus B. Now let's create a second function. And let's call it B. I bet I typed that slightly wrong. C equals to 3, and we'll try returning A plus C. Now if you run function A, it should work just right off the bat, as long as I actually type it with the right case. Alright, so that worked. Whenever you type up function B, you'll notice that it says that A is not defined. That means that A only had local scope inside of function A. Once you hit that return statement in function A, both A and B variables go out of scope and are no longer available to be used. So basically you can only use A and B in function A. They're not available to be used in function B. Let's try fixing that. Let's just change function A up a little bit. And make A into a global. Alright. So let's call function A again. And it works the same way. Now we can try out function B and see if it works too. And yes, it does. So that global keyword makes the A variable available to all of the functions in this set, in this namespace. What that means is that you can use the variable A in both functions because now it has a global scope. Now, I really don't recommend using global scope all that much because it does make it everywhere, and if you happen to change it in another location and don't realize it, you can end up with some really screwy errors. So let's say we called function A again, and some other function, like C or D, had changed to A. What if we don't want A to be changed? Well, there's nothing stopping it from getting changed because we just made it global. So this can just cause some really confusing logic errors. This is why I don't recommend doing globals. At this point, you should know just about everything you need to know. I do have one tip though, and it's called the don't repeat yourself tip. It's basically the dry functionality. Don't repeat yourself. What does this mean? It's a concept that you should avoid writing the same code more than once. This is why we end up breaking stuff into functions. So you can call the function over and over and over again, and you get the same result. That way you don't have to have a little piece of code that just adds stuff every so often. You can just call a function and have it add. Or you'll notice that you have a big loop that you've defined several times. That's probably a good time to put that loop into a function. Whenever you see repeated code, it's time to put it into a function. So, I know I'm repeating myself, but don't you repeat yourself when you're coding. Thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial.